So, welcome to this Creative Conversations from the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred. My name is Angela Voss, and my guest today is my very old friend, Darby Costello, who is an astrologer, lecturer, writer, living in London. She's been practicing astrology for over 50 years, and we've known each other for probably at least 30 years.
Oh, more than that. I came here 37 years ago, and we met like within, so it's probably about 35 years we've known each other.
35 years. That's going back a long way. So it's absolutely wonderful to share your insights about astrology and practice. And
Pleasure.
Darby's also got an MA from the in cultural astronomy and astrology. And she lectures all around the world and is a tutor for various schools in astrology. So she's very, very experienced in teaching and practicing and writing about astrology. So it'll be wonderful today to explore how you first started and your views about the relationship between astrology and academia and all sorts of things really about astrology as a practice and its value today and how we can perhaps raise its profile because it's such a valuable tool in helping people understand themselves and the world and the events that are happening at the moment. So the first thing I'd like to ask you really is, how did you first begin to become interested in astrology and practicing it?
Well, I graduated from quite a good university in America in 1966, and it was 1966. So the first thing I did was go off to California. You know, I left the very rigid, you know, it was a Catholic university, very, you know, and but it was 1966. So we all just started moving around, and I think it must have been, was it in California? I met some people and we went off to Mexico, and we took, there were 5 of us, and we stayed in Yucatan for a couple of months, and we each took 2 books, and the 8th or 9th book I read, lying in the hammock in the middle, we were fruitarians, we were only eating fruit, you know, we were doing that, and one of the books I read was an astrology book, and I keep thinking it was by Jess Stern, called A Time for Astrology or something. But then when I looked it up, it said it was published in 1971. So that doesn't make sense, but it was, I don't know. Anyway, I read it, and he came in as a skeptic to look at astrology because it was getting popular amongst the hippies. And he came away thinking it was wonderful. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I went to California and somebody did my chart. And we both figured out how to do it. We spent 8 hours sitting at a table, obsessed, but didn't know what it meant. And when I went back to the East Coast, because I thought, this is interesting, I want to know more about it. And somebody said the best schools, the best place to learn it is back in the East Coast. So I hitchhiked back to the East Coast, as one did then, and found a couple of people who were teaching it, Francis Lacoin and Louis Acker and Isabel Hickey. And I went to Isabel Hickey. And she said, you've got the chart of an astrologer, you must study with me. But I'm not starting until the autumn. So in the meantime, go to Francis and Louis, who she didn't like, but she was afraid of losing me. So she sent me there. And then I started studying with her. And for 1.5 years, I studied with her and became obsessed. And I didn't really want to, because just before that, I'd been in Vermont or someplace, New Hampshire, and I'd read Dame Rudyard's The Pulse of Life, and then I fell in love. It wasn't like, oh, I want to learn this. It was like I fell in love. And I've written about it somewhere, but I sat in a field weeping for an afternoon because I knew it meant it was the end of my life as I planned it. You know, MA, PhD, get married, have children, life, convention, and I just knew that. And so I went to Isabel, and then she said, you must come. And then it just began. And from then, that was, I think, 68, 69 probably, because I'd traveled a lot and done a lot of stuff in the meantime. From then, there's never been a day in my life that I haven't been an astrologer. never, not a moment, not a thought around it. I've met people who married people that didn't like astrology, and I've never even had a boyfriend in those days who didn't think it was interesting. And if they didn't, I dropped them. You know, it was like, woof, it was like so inside. So, and then I just traveled all around the world and did many things, and began practicing and did it ended up in South Africa, did it for free for a long time because I didn't know how to do it any better. I was afraid of charging. And then an old astrologer I met said, you must start charging money. She said, I never charged, and you will learn in 5 years more than I've learned in 50 years if you dare to charge money. And I thought that was amazing, you know. And I went back to Joburg from Cape Town, and the first person that came to me said, at the end of it, how much do you charge? And I said, I don't. And he handed me 10 Rand, which is about 2p now, you know, nothing. And he handed me 10 Rand and he said, you do from now. He was a Cancerian with Leo rising and very powerful. And from that moment, I started charging. And that's been my living ever since.
Can you say something a bit more about that moment when it grabbed you and you felt your life changed? Because the similar thing happened to me when I first started learning astrology. As soon as I made my chart and made the connection between the symbols and my life, it was like an extraordinary revelation of some other kind of order of existence, or it was an extraordinary feeling. Can you say anything more about that feeling?
I didn't have it when somebody did my chart. Two different guys, one in California and then one in Vermont or New Hampshire, wherever it was, did my chart. And both of them said, ooh, you have the chart of an astrologer. Let me teach you. And by the second one, I thought, really good, come online, you know, I mean, really, I mean, this is what that's all I thought. But when I read, but it sort of got me a little bit excited, but I sort of pulled back. But when I read that book, The Pulse of Life, in the field, I just read it, you know, all of this is the signs, one after another after another. And Angela, I don't know what happened. I just remember sitting there, finishing it, and starting to cry. And knowing that it was talking a language that everything in me had to learn. The only other time I'd had that was when somebody read Dante to me in Italy when I was traveling after university, and I wept again because I wanted to learn Italian. It was so beautiful. But this was different. This was not, I want to learn it. It was like, I have no choice. I have to do this. And it just headed me in a direction, and everything was there nothing was obstacling it, you know, nothing was in the way. And remember also, I was in a world where it was very common. Everybody knew their signs, you know, we were hippies. And from the moment I started looking at it, every single person I met, I would say, what are you? And they'd tell me. And all I knew was their sun sign. And then I'd read it, and then I'd say more about it. And then once I started learning it, I'd say, you have sun in Aries and Moon in Taurus. Okay. And I'd start saying things immediately, you know, and still today, I probably, if I'm watching someone on TV and they're interesting, I immediately look up the date of birth. It's just a reflector somehow.
So would you say over the years that you've become almost sort of psychic in the sense of not so much reading the symbols from what you've learned, but just simply tuning in?
I always say no if somebody says that when I'm doing a chart over there or here through the window nowadays. If somebody says, oh, you're channeling, or are you psychic or something, I say no, I'm just reading the chart. And I'm doing it because, but what happens inside, I'm watching, you know, what happens inside. Because when they come, I don't let them ask me any questions until I've articulated the chart. So I say, just sit there, I give them water, I give them paper to write. And I just say, you can ask me anything after, but for now I just think, and I turn the recorder on. And for the first 15 minutes, I describe the chart. And I always start out with the same thing. You have just a little blurb about Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, you know, Jupiter. And then I go from planet to planet. I just follow wherever my mind goes. And I just touch every planet and every something to get a picture of them. And then I turn off the recorder and I say, does that make sense? And generally they say yes. I mean, sometimes when I really got it, they go, whew, how did you do that? And sometimes they say, yes, that's very interesting, you know. And then they lead me where they want to go. But when I'm looking at it, I have images. I'm watching pictures. So I'll say, you have Sun in the 11th house, Sun and Mars conjunct in the 11th house, let's say. And immediately I'm seeing their father in all different kinds of social situations. And then I'll say, and it's in Sagittarius, say, and I'm seeing the father as somebody who teaches or travels. And then I take one picture and describe it. And later I find out some of those pictures were very accurate and others weren't quite as accurate, you know. So it doesn't feel like being psychic. It feels like the images set off pictures, the symbols set off pictures in my mind, which I can then describe. And sometimes it feels like I'm holding a mirror up to them because they say, I've never been seen like this before. And it feels as though I've painted something on the back of glass and it turns into a mirror for them.
Well, that's one of the most powerful aspects of astrology, isn't it? With the symbols, that they mirror back to you aspects of yourself that you may not be aware of, or that you've buried for a long time.
Yeah.
So
and you can say something that you think, like you'll see a particular aspect, and even after all these years, I'll think, God, I haven't thought about this aspect in years. I don't know what it means, and so, but I have to say something. So I start out rather simple. You have Saturn in Scorpio, squared the moon in Leo, whatever. And I'll say, okay, and then I'll just start thinking, and then slowly it becomes, it's like all the knowledge of all the years starts rising up to help me. It's like having a huge archive of images here and words there. And I just pick up and open, yes, I remember what Saturn is, kind of thing.
It reminds me of what Jeffrey often says about the difference between speculating and realized interpretation.
Oh, that's
astrologers have to go through quite a lot of process of speculating.
Yes.
This may mean this may mean that.
Yes.
Then as soon as the client realizes the truth of it, like they see their father in that Mars, or they see their mother in the Venus, then it becomes kind of realized and embodied.
Yes.
And they can start changing or moving or making decisions about it.
Navigating with it.
Yeah.
I say we're navigators. When people say, what are you doing? What do you do when you're an astrologer? I say, I'm a navigator. I help people navigate by the stars.
So, how would you define what it is that's happening when we are reading the signs in this way that seem to reveal inner lives of people?
The only thing, I go through phases where I say it in different ways, and this is this time of my life, it's different in different times. But as far as I understand, everything reflects everything else, even at a distance, if you think of Rupert Sheldrake's work, morphic resonance, everything reflects everything else somehow. And I always have this notion, because I have 12 house planets, and I thought if I ever ended up in an institution or a jail or something, I'd have to find patterns to make meaning of them. And what if the only thing I could find was the sun would come for a short time through the window and make certain over time, I'd start noticing the pattern, and I'd end up saying, aha, it's only come for 2 minutes today. Aha, tonight's not going to be. I'd start making meaning out of the patterns.
Right.
I see us as pattern making creatures.
Yeah.
And so these are just there, and they've been there for everyone for so long that it was easy, natural for us to look at them moving around and saying, oh, but isn't it interesting? Because every time that red one is up there, we all get angry with each other, kind of thing. And over time, it became a huge reflector. To me, it's a reflector. People say, oh, I've got Mars in this and it's making me do that. No, it's not. It's reflecting the energy here somehow. So I see, as a mirror. But I think you could do it with anything. I mean, I often think you could do it with ants going across the room. And if every day they went out and came back and went across the room for their food, in the end, I'd start reading that pattern and start,
Yeah.
you know, navigating by it somehow.
So do you think that there's a kind of problem for sort of intellectuals today who have difficulty with understanding that kind of symbolic move, particularly like the kind of more scientific kind of astrologer who will try and justify
Prove everything.
kind of influence coming down from some physical planet, and you know,
Yeah.
so the question of determinism versus kind of symbolic interpretation, or more sort of divinatory approach to astrology, is quite a big one within the tradition of astrology itself.
It is. I know. I'm not as aware of it as you are because of the work you do. But I've got, you know, Einstein, who was a Pisces with Moon in Sag, and he had Mercury conjunct Saturn in Aries. You know, and I love his sentence. He said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift."
Yeah.
And that's Einstein. You know. And so I think we learn astrology bit by bit by bit. We have to have a good enough mind to remember all the bits, you know, step by step. But once we start practicing it, we have to move to what he's calling the intuitive mind,
Yeah.
which sees several things all at once rather than a linear, you know.
Yeah.
And so an academic, I mean, I do charts for, I mean, I have regular clients. I've got a couple of, last week I had 2 professors. They, every 4 months, and they have for 20, 25 years, you know, 4 or 5, one does every 6 months, the other does every 4 months. And they're fine. They don't tell their colleagues they do that, you know, and I've got a lot of people, straight people, I call them, who never tell their colleagues. And they just accept that there's another kind of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And other people, the linear mind is the only one. And I remember, like, when I finished the MA, a lot of my friends went on to do PhDs, and I didn't. And the reason I didn't, and this is only because of my mind, not everyone else, but I started hearing myself say over there, when I say something, I would hear myself say, "And what's the evidence you have for that?" And I thought, no. And I was afraid if I went on academically more, I wouldn't be able to just look at the chart.
Mm.
So I stopped, and I still love the academic thing, the way I learned to think academically. But I think I'm probably seeing academia in a more amateur way. Because you're an academic and you operate intuitively. But for me, they started fighting with each other, the two.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask you that. When you were studying for your MA, I think you wrote a beautiful dissertation about Venus.
I loved it.
Yeah. Did you find that sort of academic approach and having to conform to, you know, the academic discipline kind of interfered with, or was in any way contradicting, or, you know, was it a problem that you were having to do that at the same time as reading charts and getting into that other mode of
doing charts was fine because I've been doing it for so long, except for that sentence that started coming, "What is your evidence for this?" Get out of my head, you know. And the interesting thing, it's interesting because I did the dissertation on Venus, and I loved the work. I loved every minute of doing that MA. It was total joy from beginning to end. I mean, writing the papers was joy in the way, you know, like tormented joy kind of thing. But I didn't get a distinction, and most of my friends did, and I wept about that. I got one below a distinction, one, and I absolutely knew why, because there were points where at the end of a section, I should have done a certain thing and said, now, da 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 da. And because I was talking about Venus, I couldn't do it. I had to keep it slightly in the poetic mode, and I couldn't bring it into I just couldn't do it. I couldn't, and I don't know how to describe what I couldn't do, but I couldn't academicize what I'd just done. And because of that, and I understand because of that, I didn't go that one step further, you know. So it does feel like a different mind, and it's hard to put the two together, but you do it and Jeffrey does it. And, you know, other people do it, but
It's a strain though, you know.
Yeah.
I've always found it quite a struggle to bring that kind of intuitive, deep sense of the symbolic through into a world which understands everything very kind of factually and literally. And
linearly.
It's never ever been easy. And I think maybe occasionally I've glimpsed a time when I've been able to manage it. But I think we're talking about translating the right hemisphere knowing through back into left hemisphere knowing, or to communicate it to the world. So I suppose that really is a sort of next question is, how do you feel, you know, the status of astrology today? I mean, has it, in all the years you've been practicing, have you seen any change in the sort of attitudes towards it generally in the mainstream, and how do you feel there's a way forward with it? I mean, whenever I practice astrology, I get so excited about the fact that, you know, this is a way of self-knowledge, and this is a way of symbolically understanding the picture and the world we're living in, which reveals things in a way that nothing else does. It's so powerful, and it's so true, and it's so immediate, and yet it is
it's so useful
and beautiful, but still so completely rejected by institutions,
conventional,
by you know, powers that be, as woo-woo, as superstition, as anti-intellectual, particularly. Do you see any evidence of this changing, or what do you see as the sort of future of astrology?
I think I probably, I have a lot of friends who are out there to make it more accessible and everything. And I tend to, I think I tend to want to keep it separate. And the reason is very practical. I think when something becomes mainstream and it's accepted by convention, it becomes corrupt. It can't help it, and then it has to die, and then it comes up again later, you know. And if it became a really acceptable, like presidents and, you know, heads of universities all had their astrology, it was completely normal. How would we stay? I don't know. I think it's quite good to be outside. I have this notion that we live out in the wilds, and we're called to do a chart for somebody, a professor or, you know, doctor, whatever. And we jump over the wall and come into the polis, and we go to their house and we do their charts, or they come to us. And then we leave and we go back out to this other place. And I think we have a better chance of constantly searching, never being sure, never thinking we know too much about things, you know, always navigating by something that is so much bigger than ourselves, will always be not good enough, you know, kind of quite. But if we get too accepted, I'm not sure what would happen. So I pull back from that a bit, you know. But I love being part of secretly part of the establishment. I mean, like the people, I have my January people, and in January, they're all the conventional. Every January they book another. And I've realized recently that a couple of them know each other but they don't know. So they sit at the same dinner tables, not knowing that each of them comes to me, and I love that. I think that's wonderful.
So there's something about maybe a more sort of esoteric side to practicing divination that needs to be kept separate and needs to be kept somehow accessible for those who know its power, but might lose it if it became more widespread. We were having a conversation about this on Saturday a bit. We had a conference on the flat land of literal thinking, and, you know, how to move forward from that. And,
that's lovely.
The topic came up about democratic knowledge of esoteric stuff versus, you know, more elitist sense. And I think there's a lot of scientists who would like the explanations of extraordinary phenomena and maybe more paranormal experiences, psychic experiences, to be able to be laid out very clearly for everybody, so that everybody kind of understands this explanation as logical and rational and clear.
Mm.
But there's also, you know, the sense of the esoteric traditions, which has always held it as a sort of, you know, not as a pearl not to be spread
Absolutely.
among swine.
Yeah.
And I think that is becoming quite strong, that debate between the sort of new science, which seeks to explain everything in some way, and the idea that these arts are very precious and are to be kept for those who really do understand this symbolic shift that needs to be made.
And who know they'll never know. That's part of it, you know, like, I mean, I can do a chart and it can really touch the person and I really get it. And then afterwards, my husband will say, how was it? And I'll say, I hope it was okay. And because I go into that space of, I don't know, you know, and I can do a webinar that really works and it's wonderful when you know, it just did. But afterwards, I think, and I touched a bit of something.
Yeah.
And I'm also, and because probably being being still seen as an outsider or whatever it is, you're never fully accepted by the world, and that keeps you slightly in a good place. If you know, somewhere it keeps you okay, you know.
Yeah.
But also, I have this notion. I keep saying it lately. Science is the new religion. Everyone believes in science and they believe in evidence-based stuff. And well, if science says this, therefore it's true. And I laugh because in 500 years, they're going to look back and they're going to say, they believed that this was, you know, what? Because I love the way I'm a, you know, an amateur historian and I'm always in other centuries. And they really take seriously these things, you know, that the earth is, that the sun is going around us and we're the center, you know. And then Copernicus goes along and says, no, we're, and that was when Pluto was in Capricorn and Neptune was in Pisces, you know, like, no, we're going around that and we're round. Magellan's ships come back. All of that is happening then. And people who say this is true because science has proved it, in 500 years, they're going to laugh at that. Everything is always reinvented, reworked, you know.
And it's extraordinary how astrology always takes us to the bigger picture.
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
As soon as one gets stuck in a kind of fact-based world of truth, it always lifts you out, doesn't it? A more universal perspective.
And I love the layers, like the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, personal, Jupiter and Saturn, social, let us say more, you know, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, whoa, you know, collective, you know, not beyond, never to be defined properly. Yeah, no, we're very lucky to have something that fascinates us rather. I mean, recently periodically I'll look at a planet and I'll think, I don't know anything about that planet, you know, suddenly. And it's almost like a whole new world is asking to be opened up because the planets return each time, but they return with different, so Jupiter has been in, you know, in Aquarius before, it's going into Aquarius quite soon, it's been in Capricorn before, but it hasn't been with all the different, so we see with all the different aspects that it has had this year. You know, so we're constantly seeing new versions again and again, and of ourselves too. You know, as
so in relation to that, would you like to say something about the upcoming Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius?
Oh, okay. I thought I'm going to be saying something about it, I actually am more interested in the fact that Saturn and Uranus square each other next year, all year. Because the Jupiter-Saturn, I know a lot of people are talking about it, and I haven't looked at that historical cycle because I'm looking at the Pluto and Capricorn, Neptune and Pisces one endlessly, you know, and all the, and so the Jupiter-Saturn, I know less about, and it, I can imagine certain things, but the fact that Saturn in Aquarius squares Uranus all year next year. And then separates in 2022, and then in October 2022 comes back and squares each other within a degree of each other. That to me is really the key. So may I say something about that more?
Yes, perhaps explain it a little bit in layman's terms for non-astrologers who are listening.
Okay. So Saturn has been in Aquarius a little bit this year, and it goes in on the 21st of December with Jupiter, and then stays there another 2 years. And it describes, in one of the ways of saying it, that the awareness of community becomes very important for each of us in one way or another, whatever house it's in and whatever aspects. But let us say the awareness that we're not just alone, we're part of community. And we have to pay attention to what others say or we think is good for the community. As you see Saturn in Aquarius. And Uranus describes the place where we're connected to something that is not easily describable, but it makes us have a particular point of view that doesn't necessarily go along with what other people think. And both Saturn and Uranus rule Aquarius, which is interesting. But Uranus will be squaring this. So I keep seeing people saying, but this is good for the community. You have to take the vaccine. It's good for the community. And a lot of people saying, Uranus and Taurus, no, it doesn't feel right. My body, Taurus is the physical world, and Uranus is rebellion against what other people tell you on one level. So and the whole year ends right. That square is taking place. So for me, how do we navigate and help other people navigate this thing that we're going to feel very strongly? You have to do it. It's good for I have friends who say, well, of course everybody has to take the vaccine. And of course I'm very Uranian, and my husband's a homeopath, but I don't want to be trapped in one or the other. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to navigate both, understand both, make decisions, and understand that I'm not right. This is the one I'm closer to. So to me, I understand the Saturn squared Uranus more than I do the Jupiter conjunct Saturn.
Because they're both fixed signs, aren't they? So there's likely to be some real head banging kind of differences of opinions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next year.
And when Saturn was in Aquarius for the few months in the middle of the year, earlier in the year, it began. So you can see it everywhere now. Even now in that vaccine, 25% of the 30% of the 9% of this type of person is not going to take it. Oh, well, then they can't go into the pub, Yeah. And that's only one version. I mean, the vaccine is one thing. There are other things that will show it again and again. Yeah.
And I think one of the hallmarks of this whole period with the COVID has been how differences of opinion have divided people and divided friends and divided families.
First Brexit and then COVID.
Yeah. So that Saturn-Uranus square is going to be quite challenging in terms of reaching some kind of common understanding.
And people don't like being uncomfortable. I think, again, I have this notion that people are afraid of being afraid. And so they go into anger and blame, you know, and that's all the screaming and yelling and anger and blame. It's better to feel the anxiety. It'll go, it stays for a couple of hours, and it goes, then it comes back, then it goes, then it comes back. Or feel the hopeless feeling. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. Emotions are, water. So how can one stay with the discomfort of the square, and therefore it becomes something very creative? And you're not going to feel it every single second of the day, but it's going to be a very powerful.
That's really interesting. So would you say for you, Darby, that astrology has been a spiritual quest or a spiritual path?
Yes, you asked that. You asked me you sent me some amazing questions that I really haven't thought about. I was coming through a customs last year at some place, coming from somewhere. I've been traveling a huge amount, not this year, obviously. And the customs guy, he was big, and he was a big, wonderful, powerful black man. And I've started in the last few years saying astrologer when you have to write on your thing, what's your vocation, not your vocation, your job or whatever. And so I'd written astrologer, and he looked at it and he said, astrologer. And I said, yes. And he said, and so, do you believe in God? And I stopped and I said, yes, I do. In fact, I'm a convent educated Catholic. This hasn't got to do with God. He said, what's it got to do with? I said, it has to do with helping people navigate by the stars. It's not religion at all. And he said, oh, that's very interesting. Stamp, have a good day. And I said, you have a good day too. And I went through. And I thought, for me, I don't know, I don't think of it as a spiritual path. I think of reading 8th century Chinese poetry at the moment as my way of touching spirit, you know. And each time in my life, I get a different way. You know, I go to a convent twice a year and just in silence and meditation. So that, but I have to say, I pray to the Virgin Mary and to Aphrodite. So in a way, like when I see her at night, I say, let the people I love continue loving. I just can't help it. It's an automatic response. So it's part of something, but I wouldn't say it's my spiritual path. It's really interesting. And maybe after I have Mercury in Taurus, so it takes me time to think about it. Maybe I'll continue thinking about that, and maybe you and I will have a conversation again about that.
Just reminded me of what Plato says about the beginning of philosophy is just going out and looking at the stars.
Wow.
Because it instills such a feeling of awe.
Absolutely.
That you just feel impelled to kind of understand your relationship with the cosmos and with these sort of heavenly beings.
Yeah, it probably is a spiritual path without even, you know, it's so bone deep.
Yeah.
I don't know myself separate from it. It's inconceivable. I can't see myself away from it. So it's probably just taken for granted like that.
You're also very steeped in, or have been in the past, in African religious practice.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something about that?
Dorcas behind me, she's the one that got me, she didn't mean to, but she's the one that got me to do the chart, speak about the chart before anyone asked me questions, because once I lived with them, with the Sangomas, for 7 years. And I was working for a small museum, and we were writing down everything because the lore was being lost, and they were upset that it was being lost. And first it was in Soweto, and then it was in the bush with all kinds of other people. And I was very close to those two people. And she was wonderful. And one day she said to me, Da, why is it that when you go to a white doctor, he asks you what's wrong? Why doesn't he see? And I laughed and said, that's such a good question. Because when you go to a Sangoma, she throws the bones and reads them. And so I started, because I was beginning to practice as an astrologer. And they called me Nona Konyezi, child of the stars. You know, those were my spirits, and their spirits were the ancestors. And so I started saying, yeah, when somebody comes to me, I should be able to see what they need before they tell me. And that's why I started doing it that way. When they came and sat down, I'd say, let me see first. And if I get it accurate, then they're going to know I can help them. So they taught me things like that, you know, and hundreds of ways of seeing. And they also made me understand that if you have a particular gift like they had, they all suffered with this gift. And in other words, they were oversensitive, and therefore, you know, and we used to talk a lot about each of our own suffering. And it was wonderful being with people who weren't perfectly fine all the time. You know, we could all talk about how we felt about things and how difficult it was, and then we danced. So they taught me about the life being now what I say is suffering and beauty. You know, somehow. And yeah, it was very sane being with them. I felt as though I'd come home for the first time ever when I met them.
Well, I always feel with you, Darby, that your astrology somehow comes out of that kind of connection with magic and the land and that kind of gift that those healers had.
They must have poured it in without knowing. I mean, I was with them for 7 years, and I was with them every day. And then in the evening, I'd go home and do charts for people. And then I go back, and, you know, it was like back and forth all the time. And I once asked Dorcas, what did she see me doing? You know, we'd been together for years now. And I said to her, what is it you see me doing? What am I doing? And I think she stood up. I have it in the hut that she stood up. And she said, Dot, at the beginning of time, and she did this, God through the bones, and you read them. And I remember saying, I try. And that's how she saw the stars. Whoa!
That's absolutely beautiful.
Isn't that the most beautiful thing anyone could ever say? Oh.
And it kind of brings us to this idea of astrology being divination, which of course is very much how I understand it, how Jeffrey understands it,
Yeah.
but how a lot of astrologers simply do not understand it. I mean,
Yeah.
many astrologers don't see what they're doing in that way at all.
Yeah. And there's a huge new generation of astrologers on the web. And like when people say, can I find, anything more about this on the web after they've had me do a chart, I say, be very careful. And I send them to the places that I know and trust, because there's so much out there that is, and now there's a whole generation of astrologers and they want to be the best to the top, and when we started, we didn't have that notion. It wasn't there because there was no world of astrology. They would just, you'd meet people. You like it too, woo,
There seem to be quite a lot of sort of young, dynamic revivalists of classical astrology now as well.
Yes.
Who are practicing in a very specific way.
But also thinking it's the right way, and like none is the right way. It's how you learn your divination of the stars in a particular way, and then you do it and do it and do it until it becomes yours. You don't do it like anyone else, but there's a lot of them, this is the right way and anything else is wrong out there. And I just think, I stay away from it. I
know. I've always been amazed at how, conflicts and sort of enemies can be made within a subject that actually everybody loves and adores and practices.
Isn't that shocking? It is.
I guess it's human nature, but
or nature. Nature is very, I'm reading these 8th century Chinese poets, and they make me aware of the amazement of nature, but that there's something, there's also, maybe it's the nature of existence in the density of time and space. Conflict is part of it. I don't know.
So, what about the future, Darby? Will you just carry on as you're doing? Have you got any plans for anything?
I know. Somebody said, a lot of my friends in my generation have stopped doing charts. And I'm sort of, and I just, my prayer to the Virgin Mary and Aphrodite, is that I will be able to do it as long as I live. And I used to say, let me die doing a chart, and then I thought that's really thoughtless. That person is really going to not like it if you do that. But let the last thing I do, I hope to be good enough to be able to do it as long as I live. So I don't want to live beyond my ability to do it, just because it's just so part of going into that space. And it is a space, the person is there and I'm like, oh God, and I can't find anything. And I have, oh God, I jump. Ha. And I feel as though I step in and she begins. She knows things. She is the priestess that I carry within me, and the rest of me is kind of, like a basket case. I don't know anything. I get upset about stupid things and all of that. But as soon as I step into that space, the one who is the priestess speaks, and then as soon as I close the door or put this down, then I'm back to the other one. So I hope I can be strong enough as long as I live to carry that one. That would be lovely. Yeah.
So it's like the power of the symbol to lift the soul, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And you made me aware of it in that way. I'm so just with it, I don't, it's true. It just takes you into I say sacred space. I mean, I have only one rule, and it's that I don't tell people whose charts I do, and I don't talk about what they tell me. And other than that, how you do it and what you do, and somehow, and I call it sacred space, stepping into sacred space. Yeah. And then you step out of it and you're an ordinary schmuck, getting it right and getting it wrong and doing it well and doing it badly and feeling good and feeling bad. But in that space, there's something else happening. We're
It's,
very lucky.
it's really wonderful to hear you speak about it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, perhaps to end with, do you have any examples or stories of particular readings or particular events with people that have really changed them, or where you felt maybe something really came through which enabled somebody to make massive changes? Just any kind of practical kind of example.
I don't know, because, you know, once I step out of it, I immediately think I don't know enough. And the only thing I can think of is that sometimes people send people to me and they come, and then they come forever. And they say things like, this is the one place where I feel as though I'm seen completely without any judgment whatsoever in all of the myriad ways that I can be. And so, you know, little things that people say rather than, and it's really, it nourishes me when somebody says something like that. And but I don't know. Again, I'd have to take time and think if somebody, I mean, people have said you've changed my life completely, and I think maybe it's the one who stands outside is never sure. The one who's in there is doing it with all of her. But once I stand outside, I think, well, and some people, like I met somebody once going in a conference, and she said, I came to you 30 years ago and you absolutely changed my life, and I'm delighted to see you. I never would have gone the direction I did, and I'm very grateful. Thank you. And I said, thank you. Whew. But well, sometimes people think you did something. Sorry. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I can remember coming and having a reading with you. It must have been like at least 30 years ago. And I can remember just very specific things you said about how an Aries moon needs to work, which is, you know, constantly doing new things and trying new things and beginning new things.
Yeah.
And I've just always remembered that as being, it's fine to have an Aries moon, and it's fine to keep watching things, and just the most sort of simple statement, which is quite obvious, can just be a sort of reassurance about one's own nature, can't it?
I think maybe that's it, Angela. Maybe that's what people get most of all, a kind of reassurance, because so often they say, after I do that first 15 minutes, they say, oh, you mean it's okay to be like that? I am like that?
Yeah.
And I can't stand when people say, oh, he's got a moon squared this and it's bad. Oh, it makes me crazy. Bad, good, positive, negative. No, it's just a story. I always say this is an energy field, the energy field into which you incarnated. And I never know who's going to come up the stairs, you know, because I've done the chart ahead of time. I still draw it up ahead of time because I've been doing that forever. And I like drawing it, you know. And when they come up the stairs, I get a feeling for who it is. But the chart is an energy field in which they incarnate and through which they express themselves to me. So, and they'll say, oh, gosh, that's me. I've always felt that I shouldn't do this and that, but it's me. And that's what excites them so often, I think. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic place to finish, Darby.
Okay, good.
Thank you ever so much.
No, it's been a real pleasure. A real pleasure.
Connect. And I hope that some of the people listening will pick up some of that enthusiasm and maybe think about you know, visiting an astrologer or looking at their own charts and thinking a bit more about it. Great, thank you.
Good. A real pleasure. Okay, bye.